So great, thanks everybody. Yeah, so the first 3 years that I worked at Meewasin, I worked as an interpreter at Beaver Creek Conservation Area, and then in 2022, I transitioned to my current role as a resource management technician. And so now I do a lot more like field work and report writing and stuff for Meewasin, but I've kind of been able to see Beaver Creek from a few different lenses, which has been really interesting. So to give you some backstory about Beaver Creek and kind of the process of this presentation coming together. For the last year and a bit, I've been working on a report called a baseline inventory. And the purpose of this report is to provide like a snapshot in time of the ecological health of the area, which is informed by how the site's been used in the past, the history of the site, and how that's going to inform future management decisions for this area. So just to give you a little bit of a backstory there of kind of where this information came from. And it's also, I just want to mention too, with the history of Beaver Creek, there's a lot of information, so I'm trying to keep this brief, but if folks need to leave early, there's no problem to do so because it's being recorded and Katie will send it out to you afterwards. So I just want to make sure that, can you folks see my cursor right now? Anybody see a cursor on the screen? Maybe not. Okay, anyways. Oh, thanks, Roy. So just some presentation topics. We're going to kind of go through the context of the Meewasin Valley and who Meewasin is. I'll give an overview of Beaver Creek, the conservation area itself. We'll talk about heritage and cultural resources, settlement of the area, recreation, recreation and picnics, education and conservation, and how those three things have all been really instrumental in kind of shaping the site for how it's used today. And then we'll talk about what Meewasin does in terms of resource management work and kind of what's happening in the future for Beaver Creek. So Meewasin Valley Authority is a nonprofit and a charity, and I'm just going to stop for a second. Folks can't see anything on the screen. Can I just get a confirmation from someone before we keep moving forward that you're able to see the screen?
Erica, we can see you.
Okay, great.
So,
I'm just going to see if I can use these.
It might be good to get external folks to tell us if they can see and hear.
Denise speaking, and it's good for me.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. I'm just gonna, sorry, one moment. I'm just gonna try to shut off some of my notifications. Just okay. But Katie, just please interrupt if there's something technical going on. But so Meewasin is a nonprofit and a charity, as I said, and we exist in order to ensure that the river valley stays healthy and vibrant, not just for today, but also for future generations. And we do that by trying to balance human use with conservation. So the map here shows an image of Meewasin's current jurisdiction, which is 6,700 hectares of land within the city of Saskatoon and the surrounding RMs. And so the red dot there is marking the location of Beaver Creek Conservation Area, just to give you kind of some information there. It's actually at the kind of the southern end of this long corridor that is being protected by Meewasin and many of our different partners throughout the city and the surrounding regions. And Meewasin is Canada's largest urban conservation zone, which is really special. And it's a lot of work that goes into managing these spaces, and especially in terms of partnership with other people and organizations and communities. And excuse me, all of the work that Meewasin does is on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. And where Beaver Creek is situated, this is also the traditional trade and hunting territory of the Dakota. And the work that we do is really informed by things that we've learned from caretakers on this land long before that we were here and colonization happened. So we're really grateful for a lot of the guidance and wisdom we've been shared over the years for that. So to give you a bit more information about Beaver Creek. So Beaver Creek Conservation Area is 330 acres. It's a natural area located about 13 kilometers south of Saskatoon on Highway 219. And the site itself surrounds the confluence of Beaver Creek and the South Saskatchewan River, so where the creek is flowing right into the river. The The site is really unique because it features a sand dune complex. There's riparian forest or forest along creek and river edge. There's remnant native prairie on the site that's never been broken by anyone homesteading. There's certain patches that are native still. And the Prairie Creek and the valley that's formed by that creek fosters really high biodiversity, and it kind of forms like an oasis on the prairie. So it's a place where wildlife and people gather, and so it's a really special area. Today there are a series of hiking trails, and we focus on passive recreation, education, and conservation, and the site's open Wednesday to Sunday year-round. But Beaver Creek is really a gathering place for people to meet nature and for people to meet other people. Beaver Creek is habitat for at least 11 species at risk. It's also home to 440 different plant species, 3 amphibians, 196 bird species, 8 fish species, at least 106 species of insects. There's many more, of course, but at least 24 species of mammals. And where Beaver Creek is situated, it's at a really vital bridging point between, because it's at the southern extent of the Meewasin Valley, and there's a lot of protected areas actually south of Saskatoon and south of Beaver Creek. So it kind of helps to increase this really important corridor, which is great for migration and also just for wildlife traveling. Beaver Creek Conservation Area has been protected over a long period of time due to the really dedicated work of staff, visitors, researchers, and volunteers, and we're really grateful for that kind of continued legacy. So to give you some background, we're going to go way back in time to talk about a little bit of glaciation, because that's really shaped that landscape south of Saskatoon. And so this is really high level because we could nerd out about this for a long time, but the last ice age started to end around 12,000 years ago. And as that glacier was melting and receding, it was kind of moving in a northeasterly direction. And it was forming a glacial lake sort of south of Saskatoon, also covering the Saskatoon area. The Rocky Mountains would be draining with the South Saskatchewan River and different watersheds leading into the South Saskatchewan River. And as that river flowed into Glacial Lake Saskatchewan, which you can see there's on the diagram on the left, that actually created a big sandy delta. And so that's why we have so much sand south of Saskatoon. So any beach site you've been to south of Saskatoon, you notice there's a really high amount of sand. And it also forms the Moosewood Sandhills Eco District as well. This area was called the Camp Dundurn Delta, just geologically how it was formed. And so this just kind of lays a bit of the groundwork for the geologic landscape and how that has informed settlement and site uses and things like that. The diagram on the right also shows a bit of the layers of stratigraphy from the site. So something that's really unique about Beaver Creek, and if anyone's ever been out there, you've probably seen that near the river and in other areas, there's like slumping happening. And that's because of these really unique layers of sand and silt and clay kind of over top of each other that tend to slip. And the sand itself tends to hold a high amount of water. So it kind of acts as like an aquifer. And so the water tends to move laterally and eventually emerges in the creek valley and the river valley. And that's where there's a high presence of springs on the creek and fresh water flow. So this area south of Saskatoon there's been obviously people on this landscape since time immemorial, and the Moosewood Sandhills area is kind of where I'm going to focus some of the information just for today. But if you look at this map, we've got, you can see that we've got Beaver Creek Conservation Area on there, Saskatoon just to the north. Further south is the Whitecap Dakota First Nation, and then the Round Prairie Cemetery. And so those locations I'll talk about in just a moment, but I also want to give some context because there's also a marker for Dundurn, the Brightwater Marsh, which serves as the headwaters for this section of Beaver Creek. So this area in about 1879, the Chief Whitecap and the Dakota people settled in that area. And so the traditional territory of the Dakota covers a vast area of North America and the Central Plains. And it's a lot of settlement sites are typically along like major waterways and stuff. So right along the South Saskatchewan River there makes a lot of sense. It's also a really important area for trading and hunting as well, using the river for that. And then in the 1850s and 60s, The area where the Round Prairie Cemetery is today is where Métis buffalo hunters were traveling seasonally in the wintertime and settling over the winter, and then traveling towards like Batoche and places like that. Then after the Northwest Resistance, there would have been permanent year-round settlement happening there. So this would have been after 1885. Something that I think is super, super cool is that there are a series of really well-established trails connecting these communities, crossing Beaver Creek and then up to Saskatoon and going further north to places like Batoche and other communities. And so something that was really exciting for me to kind of learn about in the process of this project was that, so this map here is from the Library and Archives Canada, and it's from the Canadian Department of the Interior from 1895, and it shows a series of trails that were present at that time. And so I just zoomed in, so there's kind of an area there. You can see the area in blue is actually like the present day property of Beaver Creek Conservation Area, and this trail, which I believe is the Moose Woods Batoche Trail based on other things that I've read, crosses actually right through the conservation area, which is really, really cool. So if you look at the broader map, you can kind of see where the Saskatoon areas is kind of concentrated in some of those orange and pink squares there, but it shows how this historic trail would have crossed right through here, which is pretty unique. The Meewasin Valley, or the valley along the South Saskatchewan River, has been an area of concentrated human habitation since time immemorial, which reflects the long-standing presence of Indigenous cultures on the prairies and along the South Saskatchewan River. And the river valley itself supports really high biodiversity, meaning that there's suitable resources for people, for wildlife. And so this is a kind of a predictable spot for people to want to be able to find what they need, like shelter, water, food. The Meewasin Valley is full of archaeological sites, and I'm sure many of you are well aware of how amazing Montesquieu Heritage Park is at the north end kind of the Meewasin Valley. And some of the most common types of archaeological sites in the Saskatoon area are habitation sites, so places where people would be living, processing food, cooking, creating stone tools and things like that, and as well as kill sites, so like buffalo jumps, which you see at Wanuskewin. In the 1980s, Dr. Ernie Walker, who is a very well-known archaeologist in the area, he did a survey of the Meewasin Valley and one of Beaver Creek as well, and archaeological sites in the area around Beaver Creek were identified. And something that I wanted to point out here is that on this map, you can see there's the proposed Highway 219 alignment there, and so this is kind of showing where Beaver Creek is. You can see some infrastructure like the road coming into the site, but there was two archaeological sites that were impacted when the Highway 219 was repaved in the year 2007. And so in 1999, there was some formal excavations done there, and we were able to learn a bit more about some of the older cultural history of the site. And so those two sites had some really interesting stuff in there, like stone tools and pieces of pottery that dated to the Mortlack pottery is basically it's like a type of pottery and type of stone tool that are associated to a certain time period. So the Mortlack phase of pottery would be from about 450 to 250 years before present, and then the old women's phase of pottery and the prairie side notch stone tools is about 1200 to 550 years before present. There was also broken animal bones that were clearly for butchering and harvesting, like marrow inside the bones, suggesting hunting. There was burnt bone, there was hearths and fire pits and things like that. So really, really exciting to learn about all that stuff. And at Beaver Creek too, there's also been prevalence of bison skulls being kind of emerging from the creek. So the earliest two that I heard about was from 1938 to 1942, and those were actually an extinct species of bison, the steppe bison. And so some of these bison skulls too have been found within the creek, just as the creek tends to meander and move, and it kind of reshapes the geology of the site over time. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating. So moving forward in time a little bit, In about 1881, that time period, the Dominion of Canada began selling land to colonization companies. The Temperance Colonization Society sold 313,000 acres or they purchased 313,000 acres from the Dominion of Canada along the South Saskatchewan River, which extends in the north region from Clark's Crossing down to south of the Whitecap Dakota First Nation area today. And the goal was to create an agricultural colony that was in alignment with temperance colony ideals. So that would include like no alcohol and things like that. As settlement for that colony increased, people were crossing these historic trails along or crossing the historic trails and passing across Beaver Creek. And so Beaver Creek was again serving as this oasis for people traveling. And so some of the early accounts from people who were planning to homestead in the area, they described the prairie as a trackless waste and a barren desert, but that the relief only came at the elbow of the South Saskatchewan River, which is where Elbow, Saskatchewan is today, and in the Beaver Creek area. So this area has been really notable for a long time as a place for like reprieve from some of the harsh elements, whether it's winter or summertime on the prairies. The first homestead that I have heard about along Beaver Creek, and this is closer to Dundurn, would have been in 1883 with the Wilson family. And they were open range ranchers. They had up to 2,000 head of cattle, and they open ranged ranch all along the creek. This photo in the slide here is one of the earliest photos I found that was dated to, or labeled to Beaver Creek, and it's from 1903. And so I don't exactly know if it's directly at the conservation area or maybe at a somewhere upstream. But the reason why I wanted to show this photo is that Beaver Creek was one of two locations where in the area south of Saskatoon, people would go there to harvest wood resources in order to make houses, just because a lot of people were making sod houses at the time. But if they were using logs, they had to get them either from Beaver Creek or from Yorath Island, one of the islands on the river. So that photo is really beautiful to see though, because yeah, one of the oldest photos of Beaver Creek is very cool. So oh, I just jumped ahead of myself. I'll go back 1 second here, but I wanted to point out, so these are some of the earliest homesteads that were actually at the Beaver Creek Conservation Area. So they're kind of labeled as who were the first people to be deeded like a homestead patent. So you had to successfully be able to cultivate land in order to get a homestead patent. And so who I wanted to draw attention to is this fella, Charles Gillespie. And so this piece of land, he actually successfully homesteaded it in 1913 in March, after a series of other people had tried to cultivate the land, and it was so sandy that people were really having a hard time trying to plant anything. Because it's so sandy, if you remove the native vegetation, then the wind tends to just create these like really difficult erosion problems as well. And so the land of Beaver Creek was very defeating for a lot of early settlers. And so over time, people eventually switched from farming to ranching as a more profitable way to make money off of the land. But as I said, Charles was successful in 1913. And a few months later, he decided that he was going to donate this piece of land that's labeled here. And he actually owned the area south of Beaver Creek there too, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But this area was 59.5 acres of land. He decided to donate that to the city of Saskatoon for the use of a nature park. So here in this photo, I just wanted to show you, this is one of the earliest photos that shows like a public gathering at Beaver Creek. And this is right where the creek is meeting the South Saskatchewan River. So it's from 1908. And around this time period, people were gathering there to have these big, get-togethers and celebrations. And so this area was kind of growing in popularity for gatherings. And I think that is what partly influenced Charles's choice to basically donate the land to the city of Saskatoon. And I also wanted to, there's a couple photos here that when I visited the city of Saskatoon archives, just as it shows the actual contract between Charles Gillespie and the city of Saskatoon. And you can see a signature on there, which I think is really, really cool to see. So that's from November 8th, 1913. in that contract, there was a stipulation that the city would need to forever reserve Beaver Creek as a nature park for the use of the public. So after this the site became a City of Saskatoon park. So it's called Beaver Creek Park. So picnics and recreation really started to grow in popularity during this time period. So here's a few more photos from 1907 in the top left. Then there's also some photos on the right, and I just wanted to share both of these because sometimes in some of those old photos you don't always see people having a good time and being silly and stuff, and so you can see that they're they're being silly in these photos. There's also a photo at the bottom left shows a young girl. I can't quite see it because we're not zoomed in enough, but she's wearing a ribbon on her chest that says Beaver Creek Picnic. And so during this time period, the picnics also became a time period for people to gather and participate in like different leisure activities and sporting events, which was in alignment with like the late 1900s and early 1910s, that era of when leisure was really like growing in Saskatchewan. And at this time too, like the YMCA and the YWCA also were just getting started in Saskatchewan too. And so there was some influence there. So there would be kind of these large scale picnics happening on the site. And so here's another photo. This one's from 1930, and this is showing a large gathering. And if you look behind all the people, the crowd of people, you can see all of their vehicles. So there's some like Model T Fords back there and a few other vehicles, but those are parked right along the edge of the Creek Valley. And this was a common thing. There would often be like different groups of workers or families that would have annual picnics at Beaver Creek fairly regularly. And some of these gatherings were really big, like upwards of 2,000 people. So here's an example. The Victor United Farmers, or Victor Grain Growers, they were called at one point too, would hold these really big gatherings at Beaver Creek. And so we have a picture of the pamphlet, which shows all the types of different activities that people would have been participating in on the site. And then there's also a headline there that I want to show. And I want to be sensitive about this because I know the language has evolved to be a bit more culturally appropriate and whatnot too. But these gatherings were for everybody. Like people from a 30-mile radius would come to Beaver Creek and participate in different games and activities, and there was prizes awarded to different people depending on how well they performed. So there's prizes like ice cream, a Star Phoenix subscription. People would get coal and flour and even dish sets from Eaton's. But these gatherings brought people together from lots of different communities as well in the area, such as there was Bethel, Floral, and Blackley, Saskatoon, from La Prairie Ronde or Round Prairie Métis Settlement, and from the Moose Woods Reserve or Whitecap Dakota First Nation. I'll just move on to the next one. So these gatherings were just getting more and more popular, and so eventually the city had to invest a bit more time and money into taking care of the site by working on better infrastructure to actually access the site. And then at one point, Charles Gillespie was who owned the land still south of Beaver Creek. He got to a point in his life where he needed to move away from the Saskatoon area, and he offered actually to sell the remaining 200 acres of his property to the city of Saskatoon for $10,000. But the city unfortunately turned it down at the time, I would imagine due to economic reasons. But something I wanted to read, because the second headline there, some of these articles were provided to me from Terry Hawkness, so just a shout out to him because he helped me out a lot with some of the research for this project. But I wanted to read to you what the article says. So Charles says, in offering this to the city of Saskatoon, he's hoping to fulfill his promise, and because he had originally said if he had more land to sell to the city, that he would first offer to them over other people, and because he believed that this area belongs to the citizens of Saskatoon. And he said, in this country where parklands are scarce, and especially here close to a present population of 30,000 people, So this was in 1920, a population of 30,000 people, which will continue to grow. It's essential that we have some places for recreation purposes where the mass of people can go within a short distance of the city and at a moderate expense. So he had some pretty lofty ideas, but he didn't want this area to be exploited by a private corporation or individuals who just wanted to make money off of the site. He said that Beaver Creek is the only place that answers this description for Saskatoon. It's only 10 miles away. It's approximately 100 acres of beautiful parkland through which runs a fine winding creek, and it could be adapted for safe swimming and boating, and become an ideal location for, these are the lofty ideas, summer cottages, camps, a hotel and amusement resort. He later said that his only regret was that he was unable to make a present of this land to the city of Saskatoon, in which he spent the best years of his life and which he will always have the deepest interest in its future. So that's pretty amazing that this area was becoming so beloved even then, that the person who owned the land was still considering, like, how do we create this or how do we expand this to make it even more impactful than it is? So unfortunately, the city didn't jump on that offer, but in the 1920s, Arthur Leon Coyle and his family purchased that land, and then they ended up doing a series of infrastructure developments that helped to facilitate recreation. So he also leased land from the city of Saskatoon, where that original Beaver Creek parcel would have been. And he had a vision for a total recreation area, which would include things like a Coyle dance pavilion. So there's a photo there of the dance hall that was located just south of the creek, which opened in 1926, I believe. And there was, at the dance hall, they would have these big parties and dances, and there was a few different bands that would play there, like the Jack Gordon Gaytime Orchestra on the bottom left. So there's a fellow playing the banjo there who is from the band. And then on the bottom right, there's a photo there. This was Terry Hawkness was scanning some photos recently. His family had a big connection to the site, and these photos hadn't actually been seen in ever before because it was they were just negatives and stuff. So he shared that photo with me, but they did some improvements to different infrastructure on the site too, and eventually worked on like creating a swimming hole and a golf course as well. So here's a map kind of showing where some of those developments happen. So if you look towards the left-hand side, you'll see there was like cottages, there was the dam and a swimming hole, and the dance pavilion, the farmhouse, and then kind of north of the creek, that's area where he would have been leasing land from the city, and I think also the neighboring property as well, to create the golf course and a baseball diamond at one point as well. And so it gives you a little bit of a backstory, but I want to highlight kind of where that dam and the swimming hole was, because we'll talk about that a little bit later, just in terms of how the creek path has changed over time. So, oh, and I'll just say one thing too. There was economic pressures that happened in the 1930s, obviously from the Great Depression, and so the Coyle family lost their land holdings, but this area ended up being used and rented and leased by various other families over time who were able to like maintain the some of those facilities. And in the late 1930s, I believe, or 1940s is when a series of or when a camp began using some of the infrastructure that the Coyle family had utilized. So something I want to talk about here is that this section of Beaver Creek that's closest to the river has been kind of like a hotspot for camps over time, and it's really, really cool to learn about. So this is a bit of a crude map that I whipped together here just to kind of convey where all of these different camps have happened. So the earliest camp that I found information on was from the Young Men's Christian Association, and from 1913, kind of right close to the river. So when Charles donated the land to the city of Saskatoon in that contract, there's a stipulation that they need to rent this little chunk of land for the purposes of camp use to the YMCA for them once for a month every year. Then if you go kind of upstream, we'll just follow upstream, not necessarily along a timeline here, but you have the Beth Raleigh camp. So that one was in use from the 1930s, and this utilized the dance pavilion. They were a United Church camp that operated there. Then if we go further upstream, there would have been the YWCA Camp Keswick, And so that was 1969 to the 1980s. Actually, there's a bit of a typo there, unfortunately. But and then if you continue going further upstream, the Salvation Army Camp began in 1948 and still continues today. And they do a variety of different programs. Then just upstream from them is the Brightwater Science and Environmental Center as well. And so they do a variety of programming there. They're in partnership with the Saskatoon Public School Division. And then upstream from them as well was where the Boy Scouts camp would have been located. And you can see kind of a pretty hard sandy line around there. And that's actually the border where the Camp Dundurn military base is. So they, the Boy Scout camp was in operation from 1930 to 1951, and then that land was bought out by the military base, and then the Boy Scouts actually moved to the Pike Lake area. So there's been a real history of camps along this section of the creek, and there's a couple of photos I want to show here. The one on the left is showing some of the Boy Scouts. This one I believe is from the 1940s, 1948, something like that, and it looks like it's from like a movie. It's just such an amazing photo. And then the photo on the right too shows the Camp Keswick building, which would have been there up until the 1980s. And so this area was leased from the city of Saskatoon as well for another camp as well. So eventually there were a series of stewardship initiatives, and I really believe that the Saskatoon Nutana Rotary Club had a big hand in why Beaver Creek has continued to be protected since this time period. And I think they really helped to shape the site for what it is and laid the groundwork for Meewasin to continue stewarding that site. So in 1973, the Rotary Club stepped in to become an active partner with the city of Saskatoon. So they would work closely with the city's Parks and Recreation Board, the Saskatoon Natural History Society, and the Saskatoon Environmental Society to establish policing, infrastructure repairs, and how to address growing problems with vandalism on site. So you can see there's a number of headlines here that relate to just destructive activity at Beaver Creek. And so the Nutana Rotary Club, the staff and early naturalists who were employed during that time, they had a series of grants through the government. They had a really profound impact on how the site would be managed moving forward. So from 1974 to 1975, the city of Saskatoon designated Beaver Creek as an urban regional park, which meant that only appropriate recreation could be enforced at Beaver Creek. And that kind of helped to lay the groundwork so that people could actually kind of enforce some rules and put signs up and things like that to try to curb some of the destructive behavior. From 1975 to 1982, the Beaver Creek Naturalist Program began, which had a focus on environmental education. And from my conversations with a woman who used to work in this program, she had told me that this is sort of where the beginnings of the grade 5 school program, which is what currently happens at Beaver Creek. Beaver Creek has been an education facility for educating grade 5 students for a long time, and has roots to this time period back with the Saskatoon Nutana Rotary Club. During this time period too, the Rotary Club really wanted to protect the site, again, reduce vandalism and preserve the environment and educate about it as they were doing it. So they focused on litter removal, improvement to trails, restricting access to certain areas, and making recommendations for site management, such as things that are a bit more environmentally friendly, like coexisting with beavers, reducing insect fogging, so reducing like mosquito populations, things like that, and restricting access to sensitive areas. So in 1984, Beaver Creek officially opened under Meewasin's management. So the Meewasin Valley Authority came to be in 1979, and upon that time period, Beaver Creek would have fallen into Meewasin's jurisdiction, but we didn't actually start managing it formally with the city of Saskatoon, I think until the 1980s, or 1982 or so, is when the Rotary Club endorsed Meewasin to take care of Beaver Creek alongside the city of Saskatoon. So Meewasin and the city worked together to create sort of an agreement on who would look after what responsibilities belong to what party there. So Meewasin built an interpretive center and also did some work with with the city because they helped with trail infrastructure and whatnot. And so the site officially opened in 1984. And here's a photo from the opening day, and you can see our beloved mascot Cran in the shot as well. But yeah, this is a pretty incredible photo. If you're familiar with the site of Beaver Creek, it's really neat to see this because the site has actually changed quite a bit in terms of where some of the vegetation is and how we've done some maintenance to different trails and whatnot. But a lot of the trails that were established during the time period of the Rotary Club are where many of our trails exist today. So they had a really profound impact on how Beaver Creek is today. And I just want to kind of emphasize that. So our education program, and I'm just going to play a video. There's no sound on this, but our education programming has been running, kind of carrying that legacy from the Rotary Club and doing grade 5 school programming as well as different grades 2 and public education. But ever since Meewasin kind of has been managing the site in 1984. So Meewasin partners with Saskatoon school divisions to offer programs, and there's a really good chance that if you grew up in Saskatoon sometime between 1984 to now, and you were a grade 5 student at some point, you would have attended a field trip at Beaver Creek, which is really, really a cool thing. It's such an amazing part of the history of Saskatoon and also of that site. And to give you some information about the stats over time, so in 1984, visitation for that site was 14,823 visitors with 1,861 grade 5 students. So in the 2023 to 2024 fiscal year, we had 21,512 visitors and 2,607 grade 5 students. So it's really cool to see kind of this continued legacy. And our interpretive programs have kind of evolved over time a bit to include different themes and whatnot, but some of those early themes included things like ecology, focusing on the site as a sand-based habitat, the importance of beavers and coexisting with beavers, archaeology of the site, chickadees and how different animals adapt to wintertime. And another thing that we've talked about a lot too is slumping and how this site is an active geologic site. There's so much to learn from Beaver Creek. I think in the last few years too, with some of our kind of overarching management planning and goals and whatnot for Beaver Creek too, we've learned a lot about resource management and how to convey the work that we do to the public. And I know we're getting kind of close to the end of the hour here, but we're just going to keep going. So stick with me if you're able to. But our programs really highlight the resource management work we do. And we've also focused a lot on, now we do a lot of tourism programming and volunteer opportunities. So there's a good chance that many of you on the call have attended some of these programs. But if you're thinking to yourself, wow, I haven't been to Beaver Creek since I was in grade 5, there's a lot of opportunities for you. So you can check out some of our tourism programs. We do things like adult themed programs, which would be like Naughty by Nature. There's also a birding breakfast, pollinator or wildflower walks. We also have an upcoming Dark Skies event, and there's always volunteer opportunities for invasive species removal. There's an upcoming one for wildlife tracking with Elizabeth, and I believe a twig and bud identification with Owen coming up. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled on our socials and our newsletters if you're interested in that stuff. So to give you some kind of overview of the resource management work that Meewasin does, I wanted to really highlight Luke Delaney, who's been an important part of the resource management work at Beaver Creek too. And I have had a number of conversations with him about the work that he's done out there over the years. And he worked at Meewasin for over 30 years. And so he's pictured in the top left photo there with a drip torch in his hand. And he focused a lot on reducing invasive species through natural disturbance regimes like reintroducing prescribed fire and grazing to the landscape. He worked with researchers from the university such as like Jim Romo and Bowden Pillipick, and many of their students also came. You can see the bottom left photo, photos of students also doing prescribed fire at Beaver Creek. He also made a concerted effort to harden and stabilize a lot of these trails, reducing access to sensitive areas and making trails more reliable and safer, and then that would also help to control access so people weren't going off trail as often. Here's a few other photos too, showing some of the restoration work that's happened in the past. So the photos on the left are from 1986 and the photo on the right from 1987. The photos on the left show some restoration that's happened around when the boardwalk and the deck and whatnot would have been built around the interpretive center. So the photo on the top left is, again, really cool to see because you can see the plantings that were planted right in there. And today there's like a big tree growing there. There's a ton of Saskatoon berries growing all along that pathway. And then the bottom photo too, it's also kind of replicating some of the restoration work that we've done in recent years there too. And we did some repaneling of the building in the last 5 years. And so there's been some more kind of revegetation done in that area along the boardwalk. And the photo on the right shows some former Meewasin employees in their PPE doing a series of stabilization. It's called like willow wattles. So you would basically cut pieces of willow and lay them like crosswise, and that helps to stabilize the edge, but then also the willow wants to regenerate and root. And then so you get some of these native plants kind of helping to revegetate and stabilize the landscape. So when we were talking about how sandy the soil is, stuff like that is really important for preserving not just our infrastructure on site, but it's really important for any of the cultural sites and archaeological sites as well at Beaver Creek. So this has been a really, all of these things really work to get well together. So a really notable project that happened at Beaver Creek, and this was around 2007, 2008, but in 2007, the Ministry of Highways contracted Meewasin to complete a bioengineering project in response to Highway 219 being widened and also a new creek culvert being added. So you can just see in the photo on the right that they're putting in the culvert there. So they would have actually dammed the creek, slightly redirected where the highway goes, and then changed the total slope grade of the highway. So when I was talking before about those archaeological sites, those are fully like mitigated and excavated and removed because that highway was actually impacting those sites. This project was really notable because it was the first project in the province to employ bioengineering techniques for soft landscaping following highway development. And what Meewasin did, and this was led by even some of the staff who are still at Meewasin were a part of this project, which is really cool. But they did a series of things called brush mattresses, brush layers, and live staking in order to stabilize this area. So I'll just show you another photo here. This is a photo comparing 1983, and that was the old bridge that the highway actually crossed. And then in 2007, that's the culvert that they put in. And you can see the photo on the right really shows all the area that needs to be revegetated. So the next photo here shows how there was lots of rocks and whatnot brought in as well to help to collect sediment as the creek was no longer dammed and the stream was flowing through again. All of these like willows, they use willow species, balsam poplar, and red osier dogwood to help those all regenerate really quickly. So you cut them into segments about like a foot and a bit long. You could pound them right into the ground, or they actually laid these mattresses. They were called these brush mattresses, laying long pieces of the branches and whatnot in the ground, and then covering it in topsoil that was salvaged, and that really helped to reduce invasive species establishment after the fact. And all of those rocks along the creek edge too helped to trap a ton of sediment, so that when the creek was flowing along, it actually made it really great for native aquatic vegetation to want to grow along the creek as well. So in total, this project, there was over 7,000 cuttings of willow and balsam and dogwood actually like laid in there, as well as almost 2,000 shrub and tree pots planted. And then there was an acre of native seed placed as well to help to revegetate and to restore that area following the highway development. So that was a pretty big project, and I just want to highlight that because if you come to Beaver Creek, you'll be able to see that area, and now you'll know a little bit more about that. So to flash forward a little bit, I'll play here. I'm just going to shut off the sound actually because it's just kind of windy, but this just shows some of the kind of more current resource management work that we do right now, and it's really just building off of the stuff that we've been doing since the 1980s as well. So the photo on the left shows prescribed fire. So Rennie Grills, who is our resource management officer today, he has helped him kind of maintain that presence of fire on the landscape. And we've also held annual training events with the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange to reintroduce fire to the landscape and also use it as an education tool. So the education and conservation are really interwoven together at Beaver Creek, where there's education happening at so many levels, including professional development, post-secondary institutions, research, even for volunteers learning, and then like grade 5s and younger, all ages. So it's a really, really amazing thing that so many people are able to learn from that. And I'll just play this sheep video again one more time. But we also work with a shepherd named Jared Epp, and he brings his sheep to Beaver Creek and a few other Meewasin sites to graze and mimic the disturbance that should be happening on the native grassland to help to regenerate the grasses and stuff. But because of the removal of the bison on the landscape, bringing sheep helps to kind of mimic that disturbance. And all of the resource management work that we do, including we also do a lot of monitoring, invasive species removal as well. All of this work really helps to manage the natural and the cultural resources of the site and to mitigate some of the negative impacts of things like slumping and erosion. And so I just kind of want to end by talking a little bit about some of the erosion going on at the site, because if you've ever been to Beaver Creek, you've probably been like, I wonder what's causing that. So this has been a really fascinating thing for me to learn about. So map on the left shows a series of areas that have been kind of highlighted as I've been working on this baseline inventory report and working with our GIS colleagues to figure out what areas are experiencing like heightened areas of slumping and erosion. Photo on the right shows, so this is from 1983, and that's showing kind of some of those like steps or terraces from the slumping and the landsliding happening right along the river. And I'll just so let me go back one second. So this area 1 here is where we're going to focus on. So this is showing right where the creek, that confluence where the creek meets the river. And so you can see through comparative analysis of the different aerial images from 1930 to 2021, you see how the creek in just that area and also how the slumping has changed so much. So if you recall, when we were talking about Arthur Leon Coyle's developments and how they had a dam and a swimming hole, somewhere in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, they would have had a dam kind of in that area. So if you look at the 1930 image, they would have had a dam in there and a swimming hole. And then if you look at 1944, you can see that the creek has actually moved a bit and it's trying to exit at a different location. And over time, this has kind of changed. Then if you look at the image from 1983 here, there's actually a beaver dam on there too. And so this is another thing that is constantly kind of impacting how the creek moves over time, is the presence of beavers. And we coexist with beavers at Beaver Creek because they're so important for the ecosystem. But this is just something I wanted to highlight as well. So somewhere around 1983 is when the creek would have actually been able to flow right into the river in that spot. And let me just go back one second. And a big something that I just want to mention here too, and that's a big factor as to why this erosion is happening as well, is because the river is coming around that bend, and then the creek is also eroding it from the other side. So you've got kind of erosion happening on both sides. The soil is super sandy, and you've also got all of this sandy soil that holds water and likes to move because it's on top of this kind of more slippery clay surface. So you get all these slumping terraces and just movement of the earth. So this area has been a really important part of education at Beaver Creek and was a big theme for programming in the 1980s. And if you've been there over time, like even in my time at Meewasin, I've noticed changes just at the creek and different areas where something has changed. So it's really a fascinating thing to look at how much it has changed. And another thing too about this area of the bend in the river is that this is where a lot of really giant historic ice jams would have happened. So if you were to look at a big kind of pull-out aerial image of the area, the ice would, before the Gardner Dam and before the water levels were controlled, ice would build up right at that point, and then eventually it would just keep damming each other, and then the water would flow over and flood actually the whole like west side of where Valley Road is, Moon Lake, kind of out to that area. And so that large amount of ice buildup too would have caused these big erosional events that would just constantly be eating away at the soil along that side of the river bend. So helps to just paint a picture kind of why that's happened over time. And with things like droughts or fluctuating water levels, those also help to kind of exacerbate that and cause a bit more of the slumping. But this area has been really heavily studied by researchers and whatnot, geologists, because it's called like a textbook example of landsliding. So it's a pretty fascinating area. But I just wanted to show a couple more photos because both of these are looking north. So this is on the east side of the river looking north. So if you've been to Beaver Creek, you might be able to orient yourself. But the photo on the left shows, so that would have been the year that the creek was actually flowing right through into the river. It looks so different now. It's really interesting to see that. And then the photo on the right just shows how those big blocks of land have just slipped and fallen. So you still have these terraces, these flat plateaus. But again, so the importance of kind of combining our resource management work to help stabilize some of these landscapes and also make sure that it's safe for people who are accessing the area is really, really important. These two photos here too, the big one in the background, I believe is from the 1930s, but it was cited from a report from 1983. But this photo is quite old and it shows kind of that point, which doesn't really exist in that capacity anymore. So if you look at the smaller photo, that's looking kind of at the same point. You can see how it's stepped and broken so much. And that's because of, again, the erosion that's happening from the river, from these big ice jams that have been happening, and also from the geologically from the land kind of like slipping on its own geologic planes. So yeah, that kind of brings me to the end of this presentation. So thank you again for everyone for joining me to give you a bit of an update of what's coming next for Beaver Creek. We're working, so I've been working on this baseline inventory, and so we're working on a review of that draft, and it will become public in the coming months. So if you really want to get into the details about Beaver Creek, you're welcome to read the document when it's public. It'll be on our website. We're also working on a resource management plan for the site because there hasn't been a formalized resource management plan done for the site. There's been many different concerted efforts to take care of the site, but this one will be done in a bit of a different format, and so it'll be really interesting to embark on that. In 2025, we've got a new QR code hike that's happening at Beaver Creek about different trees, and that'll be really exciting. Like I said, there's a Dark Skies event coming up later this week, and we've got a series of spring tourism programs as well. And I just want to give a big shout out to so many people that helped me to consolidate the wealth of information about Beaver Creek over the course of this project, and who have continued and sustained some of the stewardship of the site. It's really a group effort. So and thank you all for joining me today, and I really appreciate your patience. I know it's been about the full hour, but there's so much we could talk about, and I'm just excited that you're all here to stay and listen. And if you have any questions, I'll stick around for a while. You're welcome to mention them in the chat, or you can ask me directly too. But I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, follow our social media, if you want to just stay in touch with the work that we're doing. And yeah, thank you again for joining me.
Awesome. A huge thanks to Erica for doing such an amazing presentation. If you do have questions, you can pop them in the chat or just ask. I'll also be sending an email out, and you can send those questions as well. There will be links to the tourism events, any other additional information that Erica might want to pass along. But yeah, thank you so much for attending today's webinar.